You know, we're coming up on April 11th through the 17th. Huge moment in American space history. I know I don't have to tell you. But what is it like to be able to say it's been 51 years since the Apollo 13th mission?
It's been an awful long time. And when I think really about it, I was in part of the initial selection of the Mercury astronauts way back before Apollo. So I'm an ancient astronaut of some sort.
With that being said, you had so many unique space experiences. You know, Gemini, Apollo 8, and then you head into Apollo 13. Do you believe those experiences that you mentioned prepared you for a mission like that?
Well, I think the time that I was in the program gave me some experience so that I could probably react to incidents. But very fortunately, with the crew that I had with me and mission control, we were able to take an almost certain catastrophe into a successful recovery.
With that being said, Mr. Lovell, can you just talk to us about what that mission meant for you and what it means to you 51 years later?
Well, it meant an awful lot to me, not only just that mission, which sort of ended up, fortunately, successful, but years ago, long before there was a space program or NASA, I was interested in rockets. I read From the Earth to the Moon, that the one, and so when the initial Mercury selection came on, I was all excited and I applied for it. And of course, I didn't make it. So I was very disappointed because I had thought this was the way I wanted to go. But then again, I got selected on the next program coming up, Gemini. And so that sort of rounded out my career, and I stayed with it all the way through Apollo 13, and this was my career.
How did launch go that day, April 11th?
The launch actually was pretty good. We had a selection at the last moment. One astronaut was selected, and Jack Swigert was put on board, and so. But that went all fine all the way up to on the way to the moon when we had the explosion. But when you think about it, it happened at a very, if you're going to have an explosion, this was the place to have it. Because we were able to get to the moon and then swing around again in a long orbit to get back to the Earth.
You had done a look around of the LEM, the lunar module, a little bit before that happened. Is that right? Can you talk to us about that?
Oh yes, I went into LEM trainers and did a lot of work, and also, of course, I had gone up to Boston to the Harvard to learn. I forget exactly where it was, but to learn navigation and get it all squared away. MIT, and learn that. So I was prepared for that, and with my two companions, plus the good work of mission control that was backed up by the aerospace industry. So all three, the aerospace industry, mission control, and then the crew, we were able to recover from an almost complete catastrophe.
And you mentioned all of the moving pieces, and I know from talking with Gene Kranz the tension, that he describes and how everybody has a role to play. What was the dynamic? How important was mission control to your success up when the cryo tank started to have issues?
Oh, of course, they were very much the reason why we were successful was mission control, especially Glenn Lunny, who was on as the controller at that time, or as And he immediately started getting things ready to help for our recovery.
Glenn Lunny, a legend in the space, in space history, rightfully so. His life was very important in this story, and the way he was able to contribute. What was it like to work with him? May he rest in peace.
Well, of course, it was very nice. He was the first person we talked to when we say, "Hey, we've had an explosion here," and so he took that, then started with his team to go see how we could use the lunar module as a lifeboat to get us home. Now, we had thought about that earlier in the program, but we kept putting it aside to really do some strong work or study on how to do it. And so we had to figure out how to use the lunar module's engines for changing our course, or speeding up, or doing something like that. And one, of course, the critical things as the program went on was the building up of carbon dioxide. The lunar module was designed for only 2 people, and here there were 3 people, and the carbon dioxide was starting to melt quite rapidly, and we didn't have any replacement canisters in the lunar module, so we had to adopt a command module canister to work in the lunar module system, but it worked like a charm. So things went a little bit better as we went along.
How did you? It was fitting a square. It was like fitting a square into a circular hole. I know that they were different. So you got instructions from Mission Control, and they had practiced this, is my understanding, to sort of tell you how to modify the carbon dioxide scrubbers. Is that correct?
That's right. What happened was Mission Control, when we had the problem, and they could see it too on their instrumentation, went to the backlog people, I should say, and said how to adapt a command module canister, a little square canister, into the lunar module system. And so they told us step by step, and we then followed their instructions and actually did the placement. And I think we did take a picture of it, which was very fortunate, so they knew exactly what we did.
Yeah, and we'll be seeing it. I think they have it at Space Center Houston. Were you all, I have to ask, were you at all nervous? Were you at all thinking, we are in a terrible situation, we better do things right? Did those thoughts ever cross your mind, Mr. Lovell?
Well, you have to look at our backgrounds. We were test pilots, basically, and so we were accustomed to thinking about something going wrong, especially when I was a test pilot in airplanes and then in spacecraft the same way. So when something happened, and it didn't dawn on us exactly how serious this was for a while. But then if you re-listen to some of the tapes, one thing I had to do was to transfer the guidance system from the command module over to the lunar module, because that was going to be the vehicle that we were going to work with to get us all the way back home again. And as I got the numbers out of the command module, I had to add them to what I already had, I asked the Mission Control just to check my arithmetic, please.
I remember you had asked them, or someone on the crew had asked them how much time you had to do that specific maneuver. How much time did you have, Mr. Lovell? And was that an issue?
Well, we had plenty of time, I think, to do it. But of course, it was an issue, because from then on, we started to guide our control from Mission Control, or from the lunar module. And of course, we needed to know where we were and how to maneuver, and that was with the navigation system.
Can you kind of walk us through that science there? Clearly not a scientist.
Well, it was when we were on our trip. This all happened on the way to the moon, and the lunar module was essentially dead. We didn't want to fire it up and use any of its electricity or anything like that. And then when the explosion occurred, and we knew that we were going to use the lunar module a lot sooner than we thought, that was when one of the main things we had to do was to transfer the guidance that was up and running in the command module and have that same guidance position. So when we moved the guidance over to the lunar module, then the lunar module would know exactly where the spacecraft was relationship to our position and the stars, and then we could maneuver from the lunar module to get a safe trip around the moon back to the Earth. You know what's kind of amazing? I was in the original selection back in 1958 for the Mercury program, and 50 years later, and I didn't make that selection at all. It wasn't until sometime later that I got into the space program through I forget exactly the time.
And they were certainly lucky to have your experience. You had flown Apollo 8. Do you believe that the things that happened in Apollo 8, your previous history in the space program had equipped you and equipped your team to do better on Apollo 13?
Well, yes, on Apollo 8 was actually where I got a lot of, more training. But I had made 2 Gemini flights, and then Apollo 8, I was the navigator on that flight, and very successful. And then so on Apollo 13, I was hoping that everything would work. I did a lot of training on the parts of the lunar modules for landing, and then what we were going to do on the lunar surface, and then the ascent and the rendezvous again. And of course, we put all that aside.
Do you remember the moment that you realized that you had lost the landing on the moon and that you would have to now orbit around the moon? Do you remember that moment, Mr. Lovell?
Yes, I'm afraid I do. When the explosion occurred, and what was happening was I was in the lunar module, and it was just leaving the lunar module, going down into the command module when the explosion occurred. When I got down, I saw that some of our stuff was missing, and then I figured that this was going to be the end of a natural flight or landing on the moon, and then we're going to have to work somehow to get back home.
What was the issue that happened so many miles from Earth?
Well, it was a case really set up by the construction of the spacecraft itself, with putting in some of the electrical systems, and we had when we tried to on the launch pad during the test of the spacecraft, and we tried to, after the test was over with, and we tried to take the oxygen out of the oxygen tank, and we had a heater in that tank, and we decided to maybe just put the heater on and let it boil out. Well, what we did was the circuit breaker in that tank had ruptured, and it had caused an explosion and caused the tank to erupt. And we didn't catch it right away, but then we didn't know that it had failed. And then, of course, when the tank exploded, I guess on the flight itself, that's when we had the fire in the oxygen tank, and that's when I lost it. We didn't realize it during the test just prior to the flight.
And you had described in a previous interview seeing, this gas kind of billowing. Would you be able to walk us through what's going on and what you're seeing during the moments before the iconic phrase, "Houston, we've had a problem"?
Of course, when the explosion occurred, we realized we had a problem. So that was the first communication we had. But as I got down in the command module, and I was trying to determine what really happened here and how serious it was, I thought to myself that I ought to go over to the right window by the command module's spot and look out the window. And I don't know why I did it, but I thought, well, if there's something outside that I might see. And as soon as I did, I saw escaping from the rear end of my spacecraft a gaseous substance. And also on my right shoulder was the instrument panel, and I happened to have a quantity gauge of the oxygen. And as I looked at that and I looked around and I saw the quantity gauge start to go down, it dawned on me that we were losing oxygen. And that's when I, mentioned to Mission Control that here's the problem that we have so far.
What was their reaction when you said, we have a problem?
Well, I wasn't there, so I don't know.
They weren't talking to you in your ear.
What did he say?
Glenn Lenny wasn't like, huh? Do you remember what your crewmate's reaction was when you're telling Mission Control that you're seeing a gaseous substance?
Well, I said, I think they said, well, we're going to look at it, and I'm sure they could tell from their instruments the quantity gauge of the tank was going down, the oxygen was going down. So that's when I think that Glenn had really determined how serious this whole was, and started to look at various ways of getting home.
How were Fred and Jack?
We were a team from the beginning, and of course, Jack was a substitute at the time. He replaced the other astronaut, so we all worked from scratch. But Jack turned out to be a very good command module pilot. He did a very good job getting the command module powered down so we could save all of our electricity and things, and then powered back up again at the proper time, just prior to jettisoning the service module.
What was his personality like?
Well, he was the bachelor. So he was thinking all the time that he was going to sneak a girl on board this whole thing, but no, they were all great guys, and actually all did the jobs right. There was no fright or anything like that, or worried. Everybody, just as they would as test pilots, looked at the problem and then look what we could do to get over it, and work with, of course, Mission Control, who could see all those things and had the backup of the aerospace industry, the companies that built the things that could help them tremendously.
What logically were the things you had to do to survive?
Well, once we determined what happened, and with Gene Kranz helping out, after Lenny, we got in the lunar module. We had to figure out how to control the vehicle, because in the lunar module, trying to change attitudes and all that was a little bit different than it was in the command module, and so controllability had to be there. We had to power down. We had to see what we needed to stay alive for the remaining trip back again. And it was very fortunate that this occurred on the way to the moon, because we were on a trajectory sort of around the moon that would automatically put us back on the course to go back to the Earth. It was one of the safety factors of the Apollo program, was to leave the Earth, go on an elliptical orbit that if we had a problem, the moon, we could go around the moon and then essentially be on the proper path to make a landing back here on Earth. We weren't too sure if that was the case, and so during the flight to the moon, we had to make sure that we were safe and were keeping their supplies at a minimum.
Let's talk about the consumables. What was the state of the consumables on board?
Well, fortunately, we did have enough consumables. Of course, we had the lunar module. It wasn't going to land on the moon, and so we had oxygen available for that. And so we had enough to get all the way back. In the spacecraft, wasn't too sure to follow out how much we did have, but I think Mission Control, looking at the consumables and having the time to examine them, figured that, yes, we had enough. And I think if I remember correctly, we were pretty low when we finally jettisoned the lunar module for the final phase into the landing.
So you had just enough, and I know that you all sort of had to speed up the situation by, doing a few manual burns to get you into the right, with the orbital mechanics, to get you into the right position to shorten the time that you would have to use those consumables. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, well, what they did at the command module, Krantz and team looked at what we could do to shorten the flight back. So that's what they did. And we used the lunar module's engines to make the changes. And even one time, for a change, we used the terminator of the Earth. And putting the optics on the terminator of the Earth, it gave us a position in space so that they could now change our course or speed up or slow down to help us get home safely.
And that was the work of the engineers at Mission Control making those observations, that kind of calculation could be possible.
That's right. It was actually, this flight was a perfect example of cooperation. There was the Mission Control people. There was the aerospace industry that had built the vehicles and were looking at everything. There was the crew. And so by working all three together, I think that we did an excellent job. And that is also probably when I think about it now, there's a statue going to be for Apollo 13. And I think this statue represents that cooperation between crew, mission control, and the aerospace industry to further our stuff in space, going back to the moon and going up to Mars and things like that. I think it was a good example of what NASA has to do and what they did do.
Thank you so much. And last couple of questions, Mr. Lovell, is splashdown. When you realize that you all have splashed down successfully, later you have that statue depicting that moment. What is going through your head when you realize that you all have made it out alive?
Well, naturally, we were all happy, and we all breathed a sigh of relief. And if you could look at the faces of the statue, that's us thinking, and we're back on board ship again. And we said, well, we made it.
What was the reaction of your families when they got to hug you for the first time? I know you probably had to quarantine a little bit.
Oh, yeah. When I met Marilyn as the airplane landed at Ellington, it was one of great relief. Well, actually, we saw her in Hawaii. The presidents flew her over, and the other two wives to Hawaii, and that's when we first met them.
What do you hope that people who remember this story of Apollo 13, what do you hope they take away from this story?
Well, I hope that people realized, especially the Americans, that the space program has a lot of value to it, both internationally and also through research and design, and that we have a good program going, and that these people are dedicated to help the image of the United States.
Will you ever forget what happened to you?
No, I'm afraid not. It's pretty well in my mind now, sort of seared in it. I don't think I'll ever forget it.
Well, thank you so much. That's all we have time for today. It is such an honor to speak with you. it was such a joy also to hear your stories from that historic mission, and I am excited to keep telling your story. Thank you so much for making time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, and thank you too.